The old man's cat was dying due to the long drought, so he left the farm. But this thing changed everything. The Texas sun beat down on Bill's weathered face like a blacksmith's hammer on hot steel. At 75, he'd seen his share of scorching summers. But this one was different. This one felt malevolent. The land, usually a patchwork of earthy browns and the green of hardy crops, was now a uniform, cracked expanse of dust. The air shimmered with a heat that stole your breath and left your throat parched. Bill leaned against the weathered wood of his porch railing, surveying his farm. It wasn't much, just 100 acres passed down from his grandfather. But it was his. Every fence post, every weathered board of the barn, every furrow in the field held a memory. He'd been born in the small, white-clapboard house behind him, learned to walk on its uneven porch, and spent his entire life coaxing life out of this stubborn Texas soil. He'd known hardship. He'd buried his wife, Martha, 20 years ago, her grave marked by a simple stone under the shade of the old oak tree at the edge of the property. He'd weathered droughts before, seen crops fail, and endured the relentless loneliness that settled in after Martha was gone. But he'd always had the land, the rhythm of the seasons, the satisfaction of honest work. And he'd always had Ginger. Ginger, a ginger tabby cat with eyes the color of ripe apricots, was Bill's constant companion. He'd found him as a scrawny kitten, abandoned by the side of the road, 15 years ago. Now, the cat was as much a fixture of the farm as the old windmill that stubbornly refused to turn in the stagnant air. Ginger usually followed Bill everywhere, a furry orange shadow weaving between his legs as he tended to his chores. He'd supervise the morning milking, back when Bill still had cows, sit patiently by the fence while Bill mended equipment, and curl up on the porch swing in the evenings, purring like a rusty engine. But today, Ginger was listless. He hadn't even bothered to greet Bill at the door that morning, a ritual as ingrained as the sunrise. Bill had found him sprawled on the dusty ground beneath the porch, panting shallowly, his fur hot to the touch. Bill knelt beside him, his old knees creaking in protest. He gently stroked Ginger's fur, feeling the alarming heat radiating from the small body. "Come on, old boy," he murmured, his voice rough with worry. "Let's get you inside." He scooped Ginger up carefully, the cat offering no resistance, his body limp and heavy. Inside the house, it wasn't much cooler. The old window unit air conditioner rattled and wheezed, struggling to push back the oppressive heat. Bill placed Ginger on a cool, tiled floor in the kitchen and went to the sink. He turned the tap, and a thin, rusty trickle of water emerged. The well was almost dry. He'd been rationing water for weeks, hauling buckets from a neighbor's well, a mile down the road, but even that source was dwindling. He filled a small bowl with the precious liquid and brought it to Ginger. The cat lapped weakly at the water, his tongue barely moving. Bill dipped a clean rag in the bowl and gently dabbed it on Ginger's head and paws, trying to cool him down. He stayed there, on the floor beside Ginger, for hours watching him, worrying, feeling a knot of fear tighten in his chest. He thought of Martha. She would have known what to do. She had a way with animals, a gentle touch that seemed to soothe even the most distressed creature. He missed her fiercely, especially in moments like this, when the weight of his loneliness pressed down on him like the heavy, humid air. The day wore on, the sun a relentless eye in the sky. Bill checked on his crops, a futile gesture. The corn stalks were withered and brown, the leaves brittle and lifeless. The tomatoes on the vine were small and shriveled, their skins cracked and split. The well, the lifeline of the farm, was dry. He kicked at the cracked earth, a cloud of dust rising around his worn boots. It was hopeless. He'd known it for weeks, but he'd refused to admit it. He'd clung to the hope that rain would come, that the heat would break, that somehow he could salvage something. But now, seeing Ginger so weak, so close to the edge, he knew he couldn't stay. The thought was like a physical blow. Leaving the farm meant leaving everything he'd ever known. It meant abandoning his history, his memories, his connection to the land. It meant admitting defeat. But he couldn't let Ginger die. He wouldn't. The cat was all he had left. That night, Bill didn't sleep. He sat beside Ginger, who lay on a pile of old towels next to a small, battery-powered fan, the only source of moving air in the stifling house. He constantly moistened a cloth and pressed it to Ginger's fur, whispering words of comfort, praying for a sign, for any indication that the cat was improving. Just before dawn, as the first faint light crept through the dusty windows, Ginger let out a soft moan. Bill leaned closer, his heart pounding. The cat's yellow eyes fluttered open, still dull and unfocused, but open. He weakly lifted his head and tried to rub it against Bill's hand. A tear, a rare and precious thing, rolled down Bill's weathered cheek. He stroked Ginger's head, feeling the faint vibration of a purr beneath his fingers. "That's it, old boy," he whispered. "You're a fighter, just like me." The decision, made in the desperate hours of the night, solidified with the coming of dawn. He would leave. He would pack up what little he could, load Ginger into his old pickup truck, and drive. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay. He had to find a place where he and Ginger could survive. He had to find a place where the heat wasn't a killer. Packing was a bittersweet affair. Bill didn't own much. Years of lean harvests and Martha's medical bills had seen to that. He carefully folded his few work shirts and jeans, placing them in a worn canvas duffel bag. He added a couple of pairs of thick socks, his worn leather boots, and a wide-brimmed straw hat to protect him from the sun. He packed a small box of essentials: his shaving kit, a bar of soap, a toothbrush, a well-worn Bible, and a framed photograph of Martha. The photo showed her standing in front of the farmhouse, her arm around a much younger, more carefree-looking Bill. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners, her auburn hair blowing in the breeze. He traced the outline of her face with his finger, a familiar ache in his chest. He gathered Ginger's few belongings: a small, battered food bowl, a half-empty bag of dry food — he'd have to find more soon — and a faded, red-striped blanket that the cat favored. The most difficult part was deciding what to leave behind. He walked through the house, room by room, each object triggering a flood of memories. The antique clock on the mantelpiece, a wedding gift from Martha's parents. The worn armchair by the fireplace, where he'd spent countless evenings reading or listening to the radio. The hand-stitched quilt on the bed, a testament to Martha's skill and patience. He couldn't take it all. He had to be practical. He was an old man traveling alone, with a sick cat and a truck that had seen better days. He had to prioritize. He decided to leave the furniture. It was too bulky, too heavy. He left the clock, the armchair, the quilt. He left the dishes in the cupboards, the tools in the shed, the memories in every corner of the house. He walked out to the barn, the familiar scent of hay and dust filling his nostrils. Even though the hayloft was almost empty, he looked at the old tractor, its paint faded and peeling, its engine silent. He patted its hood, a gesture of farewell. He stood for a long moment, gazing out at the parched fields, the cracked earth, the withered crops. He took a deep breath, the dry air burning his lungs. This was it. He was leaving. Loading the truck was a slow, deliberate process. He placed the duffel bag and the box of essentials on the passenger seat, along with Ginger's blanket and food bowl. He secured a few tools in the truck bed: a shovel, an axe, a coil of rope. He filled a couple of 5-gallon containers with water from the neighbor's well, a precious cargo. Ginger, still weak but noticeably better than the day before, watched him from the porch, his yellow eyes following Bill's every move. When Bill finally coaxed him into the truck, the cat settled onto the blanket on the seat, his body curled into a tight ball. Bill climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar feel of the worn steering wheel beneath his hands. He inserted the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, a reassuring rumble in the stillness of the morning. He looked back at the farmhouse, the only home he'd ever known. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. He put the truck in gear and slowly drove away, leaving behind a lifetime of dust and memories. The road ahead was uncertain, a ribbon of asphalt stretching into the vast, unknown expanse of the American West. Bill had a vague plan: head north towards cooler climates. He'd heard stories of places where the drought hadn't hit so hard, places where there was still water, still life. He drove slowly, carefully, conserving fuel. The truck rattled and groaned, protesting the heat and the rough roads. Ginger remained quiet on the seat beside him, occasionally letting out a soft meow. Bill kept the windows down, letting the hot wind whip through the cab. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than the stifling heat inside. He stopped frequently, checking on Ginger, offering him water, and making sure the truck wasn't overheating. The landscape was desolate. Mile after mile of parched fields, abandoned farmhouses, and dried-up creek beds. He passed other vehicles, mostly trucks loaded with belongings, their occupants grim-faced and determined. He saw the faces of desperation, the echoes of his own struggle. He stopped at a small, dusty gas station, the only sign of life for miles. The attendant, a young man with a bored expression, filled his tank. Bill paid with cash, his dwindling supply of money a constant worry. "Where you headed?" the attendant asked, his voice flat and uninterested. "North," Bill replied, his voice hoarse. "Somewhere cooler." The attendant nodded, unsurprised. "Lots of folks heading that way," he said. "Good luck." Bill thanked him and climbed back into the truck. He drove on, the sun beating down on him, the road stretching endlessly ahead. He was tired, worried, and uncertain about the future. But he was moving. He was doing something. He was taking care of Ginger. And that was all that mattered. He glanced at Ginger, curled up on the seat beside him. The cat opened his eyes, met Bill's gaze, and let out a soft, reassuring purr. Bill smiled, a rare and genuine smile. He wasn't alone. He had Ginger, and together they would face whatever lay ahead. The miles blurred into a monotonous rhythm of asphalt, heat, and the constant rumble of the aging truck. Bill rationed his water and Ginger's food, acutely aware that supplies were dwindling. He stopped at roadside diners when he could, usually opting for the cheapest item on the menu, a bowl of soup, a piece of toast, and always asking for a small bowl of water for Ginger. He encountered a varied cast of characters along the way. Some were fellow travelers, displaced by the drought or economic hardship, their faces etched with the same weariness he felt. Others were locals, hardened by the harsh realities of rural life, their eyes holding a mixture of suspicion and pity. One evening, he pulled over to the side of the road near a small, struggling town in Oklahoma. His truck had started making a concerning knocking sound, and he needed to check it out before it got worse. As he tinkered with the engine, a beat-up pickup truck pulled up beside him. A woman, probably in her late 50s, with sun-weathered skin and tired eyes, got out. She wore a faded floral dress and work boots. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. Bill hesitated. He was wary of strangers, especially in these desperate times. But there was something in her eyes, a kindness, that made him trust her. "Might be," he admitted. "Engines making a funny noise." The woman, who introduced herself as Mary, knew her way around an engine. She'd grown up on a farm just like Bill and had learned to fix things out of necessity. Together, they diagnosed the problem. A loose belt, and Mary, with surprising strength, helped Bill tighten it. "You heading far?" Mary asked as they wiped their greasy hands on rags. "Trying to get north," Bill said. "Somewhere with water. This heat's killing everything back home." Mary nodded, her expression somber. "We're feeling it here, too. Lost most of our crops. Just trying to hold on." They talked for a while, sharing stories of their lives, their losses, their hopes. Mary told him about her husband, who had passed away a few years earlier, and her children, who had moved to the city in search of work. Bill told her about Martha and Ginger, and the farm he'd had to leave behind. Before they parted ways, Mary insisted on giving Bill a small bag of fresh vegetables from her garden: tomatoes, cucumbers, and a few ears of corn. "It ain't much," she said, But it's something. Bill was deeply touched by her generosity. "Thank you, Mary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means. We gotta help each other out," she said with a shrug. "That's all there is to it." He drove on, feeling a renewed sense of hope. Mary's kindness had been a small spark in the darkness, a reminder that even in the face of hardship, there was still compassion in the world. Not all encounters were so positive. In a small town in Kansas, he stopped at a grocery store to buy some supplies. As he was loading the groceries into his truck, a group of young men, their faces hostile and unwelcoming, approached him. "Old man, like you shouldn't be on the road alone," one of them said, his voice laced with menace. "Taking up resources that belong to us." Bill stood his ground, his hand instinctively reaching for the tire iron he kept under the seat. "I'm just trying to survive," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that churned in his gut. "Just like you." The tension hung heavy in the air. Ginger, sensing the danger, hissed from inside the truck. The men exchanged glances, their bravado wavering slightly. Finally, the leader of the group spat on the ground and turned away. "Get out of here," he muttered, "before you cause trouble." Bill didn't hesitate. He got into his truck and drove away, his heart pounding. He knew he'd been lucky. Things could have easily turned ugly. The encounter left him shaken, a reminder of the desperation and lawlessness that could breed in times of crisis. He continued his journey, navigating the back roads, avoiding the major highways whenever possible. He preferred the solitude, the quiet beauty of the countryside, even in its parched state. He found solace in the vastness of the sky, the endless horizons, the resilience of the wildflowers that bloomed defiantly in the cracks of the pavement. One afternoon, he came across a small, abandoned farm. The house was dilapidated, the windows boarded up, the paint peeling. But the land, though dry, showed signs of having once been fertile. There was a small orchard, the trees gnarled and neglected, but still bearing a few withered fruits. Bill parked his truck and explored the property. He found a well, its pump rusted and broken. He spent hours trying to repair it, using his limited tools and his even more limited mechanical skills. Finally, with a groan and a sputter, the pump came back to life, drawing water from the depths of the earth. The water was cool and clear, a gift from the land. Bill drank deeply, feeling a surge of hope. He filled his containers, watered the thirsty trees, and gave Ginger a long, refreshing drink. He stayed at the abandoned farm for a couple of days, resting, repairing his truck, and regaining his strength. It was a temporary haven, a place of peace in the midst of his uncertain journey. As he prepared to leave, he felt a pang of sadness. He wished he could stay, bring the farm back to life, plant new crops, and rebuild. But he knew it wasn't his. He was just a passerby, a traveler on a road less traveled. He left the farm as he found it, except for the well, which now flowed freely, a testament to his brief presence. He drove on, carrying with him the memory of the abandoned farm, the taste of the cool water, and the renewed hope that it had given him. The road was still long, but he felt stronger, more resilient, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He had Ginger, his faithful companion, and he had the kindness of strangers, and the stubborn will to survive. That was enough. For now, it was enough. The landscape began to change gradually. The relentless brown of the drought-stricken plains slowly gave way to patches of green. At first, it was just a hint, a slightly less parched field, a tree with leaves that weren't quite so brittle. But as Bill drove further northwest, the transformation became more pronounced. The air felt cooler, less oppressive. The sky, which had been a constant, blinding blue, was now often dotted with clouds, promising the possibility of rain. He crossed the state line into Oregon, a milestone that marked a significant shift in his journey. He felt a sense of relief, a feeling that he was finally leaving the worst behind. The signs of drought were still visible, but they were less severe. He saw fields of green grass, healthy crops, and trees laden with fruit. He stopped at a roadside fruit stand, a VY Brandt display of colorful produce. He bought a basket of peaches, their sweet scent filling the cab of his truck. He ate one, the juice running down his chin, savoring the taste of fresh fruit after weeks of subsisting on canned goods and dry rations. Ginger, too, seemed to perk up, his appetite returning with the change in scenery. He continued driving, following the winding roads that led him through rolling hills and lush valleys. He passed through small towns that seemed VY Brandt and alive, a stark contrast to the ghost towns he'd seen in the heart of the drought. One day, he found himself in a valley nestled between two mountain ranges. A clear, sparkling river ran through the valley, its banks lined with willow trees and wildflowers. The air was clean and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was the most beautiful place Bill had seen in months. He pulled over to the side of the road, near a small bridge that spanned the river. He got out of his truck, Ginger following close behind, and walked down to the water's edge. He knelt down and cupped his hands, drinking deeply from the river. The water was icy cold and incredibly refreshing. Ginger lapped at the water beside him, his purr a constant, soothing rumble. Bill sat there for a long time, gazing at the scenery, listening to the sound of the river, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew he couldn't stay there forever, but he allowed himself to savor the moment, to appreciate the beauty of the place, to feel the weight of his worries lift, even if only temporarily. He decided to explore the area. He drove through the valley, passing farms and ranches that seemed prosperous and well-maintained. He saw fields of hay, orchards of apple and pear trees, and vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. He came to a small town, nestled in the heart of the valley. It was a charming place, with a main street lined with small shops and restaurants. There was a park with a playground, a library, and a community center. It felt like a place where people knew each other, where community mattered. Bill parked his truck and walked around, taking in the sights and sounds of the town. He saw families enjoying picnics in the park, children playing on the swings, and elderly people sitting on benches, chatting and laughing. It felt normal, felt like a place where he could belong. He stopped at a small diner for lunch. The waitress, a friendly woman with a warm smile, greeted him like a regular customer. He ordered a burger and fries, a simple meal that tasted like a feast after his long journey. He asked the waitress about the town, about the opportunities for work, about the possibility of finding a place to stay. "We're always looking for good people," the waitress said, "especially folks with farming experience. There's a few farms around here that could use an extra hand. And there's a small cottage for rent just outside of town. Belongs to old Mrs. Henderson. She's been looking for someone to rent it to." Bill's heart leaped with hope. This could be it. This could be the place he'd been searching for. After lunch, he found Mrs. Henderson's cottage. It was a small, cozy house, with a porch overlooking a garden filled with flowers. Mrs. Henderson, a sprightly woman in her 80s, with twinkling eyes and a welcoming smile, showed him around. The cottage was perfect. It had a small bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It was furnished simply but comfortably, and it had a small yard, big enough for Ginger to explore. "I don't need much," Bill said, his voice filled with emotion. "Just a place to rest my head and a place for my cat." "Well, you found it, Mrs. Henderson said. "And Ginger is welcome, too. I love cats." They agreed on a rent, a reasonable amount that Bill could afford with his meager savings. He moved in that same day, unloading his few belongings from the truck, setting up Ginger's food bowl and blanket, and feeling a sense of gratitude that was almost overwhelming. He spent the next few days exploring the town and the surrounding area. He sighted the local farms, introducing himself, offering his services. He learned that the valley had been spared the worst of the drought, thanks to its proximity to the mountains and the reliable water source dead by the river. He found work at a nearby apple orchard, helping with the harvest. The work was hard, but it was satisfying. He enjoyed being outdoors, working with his hands, feeling the sun on his skin and the earth beneath his feet. He made friends with the other workers, sharing stories and laughter, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since Leah-ing his own farm. Ginger, too, thrived in his new surroundings. He explored the yard, chased butterflies, and made friends with Mrs. Henderson's cat, a fluffy Persian named Snowball. He regained his strength and his playful spirit, his eyes shining with health and contentment. Bill found a routine, a rhythm to his new life. He worked at the orchard during the day, came home to the cottage in the evening, cooked a simple meal, and sat on the porch with Ginger, watching the sunset over the mountains. He felt at peace. He felt like he had finally found a home. He still missed his old farm, his memories of Martha, the life he'd left behind. But he no longer felt the crushing weight of grief and despair. He had found a new purpose, a new beginning. He had found a glimmer of green in the vast landscape of his life. The weeks turned into months. The crisp autumn air gave way to the chill of winter, and then, gradually, the first signs of spring began to appear. Bill settled into his new life in the valley, becoming a familiar and respected member of the community. He continued to work at the apple orchard, his farming skills proving invaluable. He helped with pruning, planting, and tending to the trees. He shared his knowledge and experience with the younger workers, passing on the wisdom he'd accumulated over a lifetime of working the land. He even started experimenting with growing a small patch of vegetables in a corner of the orchard, a reminder of his own farm back in Texas. He became a regular at the local diner, his usual table by the window always reserved for him. He chatted with the waitresses, exchanged stories with the other customers, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of a home-cooked meal. He joined the local senior center, participating in card games, potlucks, and social events. He even started attending the town's weekly farmers market, selling his own small harvest of vegetables and a few jars of homemade preserves, a skill he'd learned from Martha. His relationship with Mrs. Henderson blossomed into a genuine friendship. They often shared meals together, swapping stories and laughter. She reminded him of Martha in some ways: her kindness, her resilience, her love of gardening. He helped her with chores around the house, fixing leaky faucets, tending to her garden, and keeping her company. Ginger and Snowball, initially wary of each other, became inseparable companions, often found curled up together on the porch swing. One spring day, the owner of the apple orchard, a man named John, approached Bill with a proposition. John was getting older, and he was looking for someone to take on more responsibility, someone to eventually manage the orchard. He'd been impressed by Bill's work ethic, his knowledge, and his dedication. "I've been watching you, Bill," John said. "You've got a good head on your shoulders and you know your way around a farm. I'm thinking about retiring in a few years, and I'd like you to consider taking over the orchard." Bill was stunned. He hadn't expected anything like this. He'd been content with his simple life, his work, his new friends. But the offer was tempting. It was a chance to return to the life he loved, to be a farmer again, to have a purpose, a responsibility. He thought about it carefully. He talked to Mrs. Henderson, to his friends at the diner, to the other workers at the orchard. He weighed the pros and cons, the risks and the rewards. He considered his age, his health, his ability to take on such a challenge. Finally, he made his decision. He accepted John's offer. He started slowly, learning the ropes of managing the orchard, familiarizing himself with the business side of things. He worked closely with John, absorbing his knowledge and experience. He gradually took on more responsibility, making decisions, implementing changes, and planning for the future. He also started making plans for his own small patch of land. He envisioned expanding his vegetable garden, planting more fruit trees, maybe even raising a few chickens. He wanted to create a small, sustainable farm, a place where he could grow healthy food, share his knowledge, and give back to the community. Ginger, of course, was his constant companion throughout it all. He supervised Bill's work, inspected the new plantings, and chased away any stray birds that dared to venture into the garden. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the journey they'd taken together, the hardships they'd overcome. As the years passed, Bill's new life blossomed. The orchard thrived under his management. His small farm became a local favorite, pro-Vy fresh, organic produce to the community. He became a mentor to young farmers, sharing his wisdom and passion for the land. He never forgot his old farm in Texas. He kept the memories alive, sharing stories of Martha and his life there with his new friends. He even made a trip back to Texas, a bittersweet journey to visit Martha's grave and see the old farmhouse one last time. But his heart was now in the valley, in his new home with his new friends, with Ginger by his side. He had found a place where he belonged, a place where he could put down roots, a place where he could continue to grow, even in his twilight years. One warm summer evening, Bill sat on the porch of his cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Ginger was curled up at his feet, purring contentedly. Mrs. Henderson sat beside him, sipping a glass of iced tea. "You know, Bill," she said, her voice soft and reflective, "you've brought a lot of life back to this valley. You've reminded us of the importance of community, of hard work, of resilience." Bill smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "This valley gave me a second chance," he said. "I'm just trying to give something back." He looked out at the orchard, the rows of trees stretching as far as the eye could see, their branches laden with fruit. He looked at his small farm, a vibrant patch of green, a testament to his hard work and dedication. He felt a sense of profound gratitude, a feeling of peace and contentment. He had come a long way from the parched, dusty fields of Texas. He had faced hardship, loss, and uncertainty, but he had persevered. He had found a new home, a new purpose, a new beginning. He had proven that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, the human spirit, like a hardy plant, could find a way to thrive. And with a faithful Ginger cat by his side, he had found that even the hottest summers could eventually give way to the promise of a new spring.